Welcome to Woke Talk Podcast. I am your host, Sam Stanford. As a physicist and structural engineer in training with Jacobs Engineering, I've made many connections with some bright individuals who are either working, studying, or self-taught and passionate about the particular topics of discussion. Today's topic may be a bit satirical because if you're still in college or just graduated, you may feel that the phrase Zoom University is a solid substitute for your institution's actual name. This episode's goal is to provide insight and examples of how to thrive in the pre-COVID realm of learning and the existing system of hybrid education. We will also discuss how Zoom and other digital platforms are shaping the world we live and work in for the future. Now I'd like to go ahead and introduce today's guest stars, starting with first, David Bean. David is our co-producer and social media coordinator of Woke Talk Podcast. He graduated in 2020 as a petroleum engineer from Slippery Rock University. While in school, David was an active member of his fraternity Kappa Sigma and held leadership roles in a few clubs before his last semester got taken over by Zoom. Our second guest star is Lauren Wysocki. Lauren is a mechanical engineering major at the University of Pittsburgh and interns as a reliability engineer working with an automated central pharmacy system. Next up is Ethan Fisher. Ethan is a civil engineering major at the University of Pittsburgh, concentrating in water resources and sustainability. He competes with the Ballroom Club at Pitt as a club sport athlete and also participates in the American Society of Civil Engineers. And our fourth guest star is Hervina Sulliston. Hervina obtained a bachelor's in biochemistry with minors in both mathematics and biology and is now pursuing a master's in forensic science and law at Duquesne University. I'd also like to mention our senior editor, Cody Brandt. He will be listening in and providing periodic input and comic relief. Thanks for being on Woke Talk Podcast's first ever episode.
Hey, Sam. Happy to be here, man.
Hi.
Hey, thanks for having me, Sam.
So diving into our first topic now, I'd really like to hear and discuss all of your experiences when it comes to the changes in education due to COVID. For those of you who don't remember, China reported its first case at the end of December. It was actually the day before our New Year. It took roughly about 22 days for the virus to travel to the United States, and from what I can recall, it took until midway through the spring semester or about March to send everyone home. It involved over 1,300 colleges across the United States when they shut down, and it put everyone into online classes. Most would probably argue that it was the biggest shock to higher education ever. So I kind of want to start with Ethan. Ethan Fisher and I both are in the same curricula, and I thought he could maybe speak for the both of us in terms of the changes and the challenges that he faced.
Yeah, I remember when COVID started, I was sitting at a bar with a group of friends having a drink, and then afterwards, I had to go to my first week of class, and I was like, oh, geez, all right. But I wasn't going to class. I was going to my bedroom, and I was sitting in front of a laptop with professors that some knew what they were doing, some didn't know what they were doing. It was a big shift. I was even in two labs at the time, and both those labs went virtual, and one did it really well, and the other one didn't.
Probably pretty hit and miss, especially with the professors. I mean, because that kind of goes hand in hand with the labs, like you were talking about. I know I had my fair share of difficulties.
I don't think a single one of us was inside the lab ever after they shut down campus. It was locked down pretty tight. It was really rough. And then I think soils, we were lucky enough to only have one lab left, and it didn't go well, but it was the last one, so it didn't matter.
Yeah, it seemed very underprepared. I know, yeah, like you were saying, it seemed like the buildings were really locked tight. You could only go through one entrance. They were really strict, especially at the beginning. They were really strict on, like, you couldn't bring any food, any water. You just had to go in, get your lab done, which took however long, and then get out. And then you really couldn't do any sort of cleanup. You couldn't do much with the equipment there other than what was provided to you. So it was extremely limited.
Yeah. And then class was, like I said, hit or miss. I remember some professors coped really well. They kind of brought their personal life into it in a degrading way academically. Like, people still really came to the forefront and brought their good teaching personas, but people it was kind of reflected. If they were a good professor before the pandemic, they generally stayed a good professor. And that could just be me like giving them benefit of the doubt because I liked them better. But the bad professors just didn't seem to do as well.
Let's go over to Hervina, where she can talk about her program at Duquesne.
So when I found out about COVID, I was still on campus and we just got back from spring break. And so there was some people that didn't come back at all because I guess their parents didn't want them to, or like they knew something that most of us didn't. But campus was pretty empty anyways. So we had like 3 days to get off campus. And when I was back, I didn't have any labs or anything. I'm like a forensic science major. So it was like just like a weird semester anyways. I had not that rough of a time on Zoom or anything. I did all my classes. They were pretty normal. Some of them were asynchronous, like OChem, and that was actually like a blessing, honestly, to me, because OChem in person, I probably would have failed that or something.
I actually kind of want to jump back because you said that they gave you 3 days. It was extremely abrupt, and it turned into a ghost town literally
Yeah,
overnight. Like on any campus, from anyone that I know that are from different universities, they said the same thing. It was extremely abrupt. It was almost like nothing was planned. It was just like, okay, everyone go home.
yeah. They gave us like basically no warning. It was like the middle of the week. My mom had to call off. I'm 4 hours away from Duquesne, so she had to like call off, like come and get me, pack all my stuff. It was really weird.
Yeah, that's major. Just imagine if you were like a foreign exchange student. My roommate is from Thailand, just right outside of Bangkok, and he couldn't go
Yeah,
home just in fear of like, if he would bring, COVID back to his own family. And just the fact that if he wanted to come back, he would have to quarantine when he got there for 2 weeks and then quarantine when he got back here. And it was just such a high risk move that he had to stay here. And he's actually stayed here through the entire pandemic so far. He hasn't even seen his family face to face for I guess a whole year.
yeah. I was worried to see my own family too because like my parents are older, and as you know, like COVID affects like older people more greatly. And I wanted to stay on campus because they gave us that option initially, but then I guess they just shut down as cases got higher.
You were talking about how it really wasn't a big transition, I guess, in terms of achieving in your classes. Can you talk, maybe about any of your other, I guess, acquaintances or colleagues in your classes?
So I know that my friend had physics and there's physics lab. She just had to like do a bunch of modules online that like showed them how to do the lab, and then they completed like an assessment on it. So she didn't actually do anything. She just like watched someone else do the lab and then she answered questions on it. And I know she hated that because you're not really learning anything. You're just like watching and like pretending to answer some questions. I didn't have any labs or anything. All mine were like I had like philosophy and just a bunch of like core classes to go through.
Do you think that the academic side maybe got a little easier? And also, do you think that Duquesne really handled the situation well academically?
I think it did get easier because there was just like taking like tests and stuff was easier because like I guess I had like a familiar space to take it in instead of like a cold classroom. But studying and like doing homework and stuff got harder because I was like in my room and I just didn't want to do anything and just like watch TV.
I agree with that. I think that the homework side of it got a lot longer. Maybe it's just because we were in social isolation, but also I think that the professors, for the most part, thought that we had a lot more time on our hands.
Yeah, I agree. They gave us a lot of like busy work, I would say. It's just a bunch of assignments just to complete because I guess we weren't meeting face to face. I don't know if they thought that I just had 24 hours to do homework when I really don't. I had other classes still. And especially like the asynchronous ones where we didn't meet at a designated time, they would just give you a whole week's worth of work and just expect you to do it in as much time that you had, but you just couldn't.
No, I definitely agree. And I want to jump to Lauren, where she can kind of talk a little bit about the mechanical engineering labs that she had to go through.
Yeah, so specifically for like the labs, when the pandemic first hit, they like just had to like sort of give us our data and then we had to interpret it as we, do. And then as the pandemic like went, we had the decision to either go in person or do it from home. I did it from home, but looking back, I wish I made more of an effort to go in person, because then I would have been able to like acquire the data myself. Whereas like, using a DAC, there's a whole setup for that. And then, I don't know that because I didn't get to go in person, but I can interpret data for days as long as I have like a theory behind it.
Right. Do you think it was harder though to understand what the data was compared to if you were, in person taking the data yourself?
Maybe slightly. Like I said, our handouts had the theory behind it, so I was able to like take the numbers, manipulate them as we needed to.
So it's definitely more effort on your part. What you were saying is you actually chose to stay at home rather than go in. Was that more of a fear just to stay in isolation? Or was it just because you kind of had the option that you didn't have to go in? Or was it just kind of like a combo?
It was just kind of for like at ease. I was kind of getting used to, just staying at home, social distancing. I was getting used to that.
I thought it was a lot more difficult. I had 3 labs over the course of COVID, and 2 of them were in the first semester where COVID kind of started, and I got one of my labs canceled just because they wouldn't even let us in, and I think it was also up to a lot of the professors. It depended on who the professor was, whether they wanted to have that lab. In some sort of way, a lot of kids didn't get their freedom to choose.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of my professors also, it just varied from person to person, professor to professor, student to student,
Mhm.
on whether they wanted to go in or not.
Yeah, and a lot of people learn in different ways. And I know the hands-on part of that, if you don't have the hands-on part of it, especially in engineering, I think a lot of people would say in engineering that they're extremely hands-on. And to not have that type of learning, it really takes away from the learning process. And I think that's why a lot of people would say that education in the last year got really easy. It's just because they weren't challenged in multiple ways. They're only challenged in maybe half of the spectra. But speaking about hands-on opportunities, we're gonna round out the segment with moving over to David. He's gonna talk about his senior design process in which he had in his final semester at Slippery Rock University.
Hey, Sam. Yeah, so I was a second semester senior. Imagine that, just getting ready to go into the workforce, and COVID kind of struck us, just like most people. I'd say I was pretty happy at first. You get to stay home. You get to be in the comfort of your own home and stuff like that. But then our senior design, we had about 6 people in our class. We were just a new major at Slippery Rock. We were actually going to be the first graduating class. So 6 people. We split into groups of 3. With COVID, they actually shut down most of the buildings on campus, which was, a huge bummer because that was the main meeting point. That's where some people, they go to focus. I don't know about you, Sam, but like when I need to focus, I go to, the library or the science center, wherever it needs to be, just to, focus on one topic. So that eliminated kind of us meeting. You had people that were commuting, 40 minutes a day, and they want to drive up 40 minutes to meet for this. So it was obviously pretty tough. Not only that, but how it worked was he gave us basically a week's worth of stuff every week. And we were required to do all that. And one of the things that we were supposed to do was a reservoir simulation. However, we needed a program for that. And the only program that had it was in one of the buildings. And you know what? We couldn't get into that building. So you know what we had to do? We had to have the professor actually do the program for us. Now, that doesn't help us at all. We're not actually running the programming. He's doing it all for us and just showing us how to do it. Now, this, how to use it, that's a big boost, and I feel like we got slighted with that because we really couldn't do much about it.
Definitely put you behind, I would say, compared to others that maybe graduated a semester before you.
Exactly. We were very slighted with it. However, I really can't put it on the professors because they're in the same boat as us. They just got notified right away that we're switching to online classes. Now, I'm sure with any professor, you don't prepare for that. You prepare for in-class, person stuff like that.
There's a lot of institutional programs, because they do have to do their own training, and kind of it goes back to what Ethan and I were saying in terms of motivation. If the professors had the motivation, they definitely were supplied the tools by the institutions to become more adjusted to what was going on. And I guess it was just solely up to them whether they wanted to pursue that.
Exactly, Sam. Exactly.
I know with my senior design was mostly, I mean, we didn't meet outside of I guess our Zoom kind of classes and whatnot, and we only did 2 site visits. We were actually extremely lucky to get 2 site visits. And I think without those 2 site visits, it would have made it extremely, extremely difficult to do what we had to do for our senior design project. Without that, it wouldn't have worked. We would have been doing a lot more guessing. We wouldn't have had field data. We wouldn't have had the drawings that we needed to look at to do the structural analysis for the building that we were looking at. It would have been a real interesting show.
Another thing I feel like I got slighted on was obviously graduation. Imagine this, you buy the cap and gown early, So I bought mine probably in February, and then we got the news in March, So you got the cap and gown, and we got an email from Slippery Rock University that we're just going to have something online, So they do an online commencement ceremony, and all they do is just put your names down on the list. It doesn't feel the same. Like, I don't know about you guys, but there's something just about walking across that stage that I just really wanted. Just a proud moment to say, hey, I did it.
I actually just walked in May, and I felt so bad because being a 5th-year student, I had a lot of friends that were 4-year students, just like you, Dave. I felt bad because, it was a missed opportunity, and they did merely nothing to make up for that. I'm hoping that in the future that they're going to continue moving forward to have these mass meetings again where you can do the commencement ceremonies. That is all for the first segment of Zoom University. We'll be right back after this short commercial break. Woke Talk Podcast utilizes Anchor by Spotify to broadcast and supply our content to other third-party platforms with absolute ease. If you, the listener, are thinking about starting your own podcast like Woke Talk, we highly recommend you check out Anchor by Spotify. Their creation tools allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will also distribute your podcast for you so that you can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and much more. You can make money on your podcast with no minimum listenership, and one more thing, it's absolutely free. So download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Welcome back to Woke Talk Podcast. Now that we talked about the experiences and education side of college, I wanted to talk about the effects that COVID had on extracurricular activities such as social clubs, fraternities and sororities, club sports, and other social interactions. So I'm well aware that all of my guests have had some form of involvement outside of their courses, and I would love to start with Ethan Fisher. As I mentioned, he is involved in the ballroom club at Pitt. So do you mind elaborating on that a little bit?
Yeah, Ballroom Club at Pitt. We actually just got the name changed to Ballroom Club at Pitt as opposed to Pitt Ballroom Club. We are a club sport on campus. We have about 20 people in our club, and we teach social lessons, but we also do professional lessons and compete at competitions hosted usually by other schools, whether it's Carnegie Mellon, University of Michigan, University of Wisconsin, etc. It's usually the big name schools that you've heard of, and they all host competitions. And as soon as this pandemic hit, we were actually planning to go to a competition at the end of the spring. There's a competition called MishComp, and they immediately canceled it, of course, with the pandemic looming overhead. And more importantly, regardless of whether the competitions were canceled, Pitt has this student organization group called Source or SORC, and they give us funding and help us manage our financial accounts, which is obviously a big deal for student organizations since that's usually how we get stuff done. And importantly, they cut off any funding for traveling. They cut off all events. We stopped all social ballroom lessons that we taught, and we stopped all competitions we were going to. We stopped all practices. We had to cancel our instructor for the rest of the semester. It was a really brutal shift, personally.
It seems like that's kind of the first thing to get cut, in terms of funding that goes throughout the schools, especially, the state-run schools such as like Slippery Rock. They definitely like target the club sports first, I would say. A lot of the clubs that they're throwing funding to. So that's kind of a shame, I think so, because it gives people great social interact plus exercise. But how did you like over time end up adjusting? Because I know we were just talking about offset that you were in a competition last weekend.
Yeah, the nice part after the initial spring semester ended was Pitt kind of just started evaluating what they could do and what they wanted to allow. And Source sent us an email and they informed us that we could submit activity plans on what we wanted to do, how we were going to do it exactly. And so our club president and myself as the business manager, we all decided that if we could get two people who wanted to teach, we would host lessons and we would figure out some way to do it. And so my ballroom partner and I, vice president and myself, being those two, decided, yeah, we're going to teach lessons. We got no problem doing that. COVID's a little scary, but we're going to have masks on. And we figured out that the dance studio where we normally host our lessons, they had put down 6 feet apart tape markings. And so we were able to keep track of people being socially distant. And we did ballroom dancing 6 feet apart. And it is as hard as it sounds, perhaps even harder if you've ever seen Beauty and the Beast or anybody doing a waltz anywhere. But what my partner and I figured out was we put in 3 hours of prep a week to teach a 2 hour lesson, sometimes more. But we ended up figuring out that if we could keep everybody going in a straight line down the floor, we could keep them separated, but also feel like they were doing something with their partner for the dance.
That's
And that,
great.
yeah, that was a really fun way to do it.
Yeah, it seems like, you need a little bit of lobbying, a little bit of motivation, and then a little bit of innovation to kind of make it work in terms of these social and interactive clubs, especially, if you're trying to do like a sport like what you're doing. But
Yep.
now I want to jump over to Lauren. Excuse me, I want to jump over to David first. And David was involved in multiple clubs at Slippery Rock University, and he was really high up in his fraternity Kappa Sigma. What happened to your fraternity with respect to COVID, Dave?
Yeah, so really it was a tough. There was a lot of adjustments needed for our fraternity. First off, obviously, just like any club, you'd like to meet in person, but we had to move that to Zoom. But with the fraternity, we meet in person because there's many things we have to do, such as initiation, has to be in person, pledging. Most of our voting, it just doesn't seem as serious when it's online, it's tougher to do that. Just like the name states, it's a social fraternity. There's not much being social when you're supposed to socially distance. So obviously some people are upset, but really at the end of the day, there's nothing we could really do about it. One of the big problems in our fraternity was if you're not being social, why are you paying all that money? So one of the adjustments we had to make was basically lowering dues since we weren't doing as much. That obviously made people more happy. Another thing, philanthropy, fundraising, and community service. The three big ones there. Our main philanthropy event was basically making pancakes and delivering them. However, with COVID, we couldn't do that. It was actually coming up right around the corner, and then we got struck with going online. People went home, but we had to adjust and find new ways to do it. So it was a blessing and a curse.
Did you see a drop in involvement?
Oh, yes, definitely. Like I said, a lot of people went home, so really you didn't hang out with as much people. The brotherhood dropped, just the social aspect. And overall, I feel like Greek life in general, it took a major hit during this. Another big aspect was rush, and one of the big things with rush and recruiting people is talking to them in person, Like if I came up to you, Sam, and was talking to you, wouldn't you feel more involved and, more important if I talked to you in person than rather over the phone?
I would think so. Rather than you just marketing someone online, to talk to, I would definitely
Exactly.
feel more involved. Yeah, I'd feel more inclined to join as well. And it's actually good that you guys dropped your dues because I know that being in a fraternity or sorority isn't cheap. So definitely having that drop in involvement and the drop in dues is definitely something that was needed. But it's hard to fund something like that.
Exactly. Our future was kind of, ruined with it because, like you said, with the dues and the fundraising, that's what gets us to do that fun stuff. But at the end of the day, we're losing money from it. And if classes go on again this fall, online, it's just going to keep taking hits. So, but like I said, we're adjusting to it, and we'll see at the end of the day how we do.
Thanks, Dave. Now I'm going to move over to Lauren. Lauren is involved in the Society of Women Engineers and the American Society of Mechanical Engineers. How did the online culture shift change your involvement with those social clubs?
When I first started in those things, I was actually commuting to Pitt an hour every day by bus. It was hard to even stay involved then. At Pitt, a lot of those clubs meet at 9 p.m. at night when I want to be in home, getting ready for bed. So it was even harder when the pandemic hit, I feel bad about not being involved. So I did try to, and I got a position in the American Society for Mechanical Engineers as their social media chair this upcoming year. So we'll see how that goes. Hopefully it'll be a good opportunity. And then I did play intramural volleyball with the Society of Women Engineers and also just friends. But, that got cut short due to the shelter in place that we had last semester because they wanted to social distance as the semester was coming to an end.
I do remember that they were making sure that we would be safe moving into the holidays.
Yeah, and then you saw them take a bunch of tours as soon as everyone was inside, so they got to promote the school, and then none of us could do anything.
Yeah, and it's actually really good to hear though that you got a chair position in the American Society of Mechanical Engineers, because you, just like we transferred at the same time from Slippery Rock University to the University of Pittsburgh, and just having any sort of involvement in the middle of the pandemic is good. That shows that there are opportunities for people such as us to move in and thrive in these clubs. So that's good. That's a positive.
Yeah, definitely a positive.
Yeah, going on with the social clubs, I wanted to then talk to Hervina, because Hervina is involved in many clubs with a major focus on social change involving Black Student Union, Duquesne's NAACP, and the Ebony Women of Social Change. So how has COVID-19 impacted the effects of your social change groups, and how have they impacted community involvement and awareness?
Our groups usually just meet in a big classroom and just talk about stuff that's involving campus life and just the community at large. So moving on to Zoom wasn't that bad for us because it was still a safe space that we could meet in. But the challenges that we faced was we had this one open, we called it a town hall. And we just had the link up on our Instagram, and we got hacked by some, I guess, neo-Nazis, you could say, because they had swastikas everywhere. And they were saying all of these kinds of vulgar stuff during our meeting. And so we had to end it. And it was just stuff like that was really hard because Zoom is public, I mean, you can have a password, but the password can get leaked. And we just had that happen to us. And it was really tough.
That's unfortunate. So you had it open for community involvement, so anybody in the community could technically be involved in it then?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't broadcasted like that publicly. It was just on our Instagram, and if you follow our Instagram, then that's how you could get involved with it. It was just it was in June when everything was going on and about George Floyd and Black Lives Matter, and we just wanted a safe space for our students of color to just talk about things, and they got hacked. So it was just really weird. I guess someone actively looked for the Zoom code and password to do what they did.
That's very weird and unfortunate. I know that has happened very often with Zoom and other platforms like Microsoft Teams and stuff. I know Zoom's more heavily used than others, but I've definitely heard that happen before. And there's definitely horror stories out there that might be even worse, where you have people sit in and cause a major ruckus. Well, that's good that, you still were able to stay online and stay extremely involved. Did you have any drop in involvement in terms of your social clubs, or was it pretty mainstream?
It was very hectic in getting involvement. We had to kind of force people and have incentives. If you join, we'll have a Kahoot, and then we'll have a game or a prize. And that's how mainly we got our people. There was a drop in involvement, I would say.
That's interesting, because we were in such social isolation. You'd think more people would want to be involved in these social clubs, especially with a really great cause like with what you're involved in.
Yeah, I think it's just that people got Zoom fatigue. You're on Zoom all day for classes, and then maybe if you have other more important professional organizations that you're a part of, and then to also then jump on another thing where you talk about sometimes heavy stuff. It's just a lot for that person to just be on Zoom for hours at a time,
That's true. That is definitely a lot to handle. Yeah, Zoom fatigue is definitely real. I don't know anybody that hasn't talked about it. Just from my own personal experience, I know sitting from 8 a.m. to sometimes 8 p.m. with very minimal breaks because we have all this busy work to do. It can be a real thing. It definitely takes a toll on people's psyche. And I would say, if you're out there and you're listening, and please definitely go and get some help or talk to somebody about it, because there's plenty of resources throughout the school or even third party that would definitely be able to help you. But thanks for being. I really appreciate that. We have to take a short break, and when we come back, we will discuss work and life impacts due to the pandemic. Woke Talk Podcast would like to acknowledge Tree Cup Tea for their delicious organic tea and their cause for reforesting the island of Haiti. At the start of 2006, Haiti was stripped of 80% of their forests due to agricultural malpractice. Because of their partnership with Haiti Friends, a non-profit tree planting organization, Tree Cup Tea's goal is to fully restore Haiti's forest by 2030 and continue to support reforestation worldwide. Tree Cup Tea sells 4 different flavors of tea that can be bought by the 12-pack and delivered right to your door. With every purchase, 12 trees will be planted in Haiti, along with a supply of 12 complimentary maple tree seeds that can be planted in your very own neighborhood. To learn more about their cause, operations, and tea, go to www.treecuptea.com or follow Woke Talk Podcast on social media platforms such as Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter to find Tree Cup Tea's official link. Just remember, Tree Cup Tea uses your contributions of buying their tea to plant a beautiful tree. And welcome back to Woke Talk Podcast. Leading into our third topic, I wanted to talk about work and life changes. Specifically work-related talk because each of my guest stars are either working full-time or working as an intern. I think the viewers would like to know the differences between pre-COVID and present working conditions. So I'd like to direct this to David because he has been working full-time throughout the majority of the pandemic.
I'm going to start it off with just basically the job search and what I had to go through for that. So being a senior, you're always applying for jobs, even your junior year, getting internships and then searching for jobs, mainly your senior year. I was searching for jobs and I pretty much had this one job lined up. It was hydraulic fracking group or whatever. And he told me to text him whenever I graduated, and COVID hit in March. I graduated in May, and I shot him a text, and turns out they weren't hiring anymore. They actually had to lay some people off, and it was a hard time for it mentally for so many people getting laid off. I saw a stat that just in 2020 alone, there was 114 million lost jobs, and that's pretty insane. And then to think about it, someone graduating in May trying to look for a job when that many jobs are being lost, it was honestly really tough. You also had the jobs where, you get on an interview and you go through the interview and then they just say, hey, we actually can't afford to hire anyone right now. And it's just really tough. But the one thing is you just got to keep trying. Just like any job interview, even if it wasn't during COVID, you just got to keep trying, keep applying, because there are jobs out there. There are people hiring. And that's actually how I found my actual job now. There are COVID restrictions with it, but it is nice because it is like outside. So you are socially distanced and still work and do all that stuff. Some of the complications, usually they have this training that's in person. The job that I'm doing is a lot of hands-on work, repairing stuff. And at this so-called boot camp, they teach you everything the right way to the books, and that basically got eliminated because you couldn't have people coming together in groups, inside and doing all this stuff. So everything I had to learn was basically just, word of mouth. And you know how that is. If someone's teaching you, they might teach you their little tricks and stuff, and you never know what's the right way. So that was obviously pretty tough. Me, I like doing things to the book and not knowing exactly what's right. It's kind of tedious.
Yeah, I really want to reiterate what you were saying earlier with that statistic on job loss. I think you said 114 million.
Yep, 114.
In the United States, I think there's like 300 some million people. So just to gauge a scale of unemployment or, just people getting laid off, I guess, not really unemployment, but just people getting laid off, that's astounding. Whenever I was looking for jobs too, I had a heck of a time. I started searching out of state and just trying to just apply to everything I could because Pittsburgh, where I'm stationed at now, it's vast in terms of the firms that do what I do, which is structural design. And I was looking at structural design, but the thing is with the pandemic, it really shut everything down, like in terms of new projects. So yeah, there was construction managers being hired, but there wasn't structural designers like myself that were being needed as much because there wasn't, new projects going around. So I definitely understand, but just want to reiterate, just keep plugging away. It's going to happen, and as time goes on, more and more people or more and more companies are going to be willing to hire you. It's just the rebound effect. And I would say, while you're searching for jobs, work on your craft, learn something new, learn a new platform that's really going to make you stand out, and watch a lot of information videos that based on how you can critique your resume and the way you talk to make yourself stand out.
I like to make a point off what you said. Applying to jobs in different states, I totally agree. You look at some of the other states, how they handle it, whether it be Texas, them reopening super early. Some people, if they really need a job, they might have to go down there. If that's what's hiring, you got to do what you got to do.
Yeah, definitely. So thanks, Dave. I appreciate that. And now I'd like to move on to Lauren and Ethan. You both have internships this summer in two different fields. Could one of you walk me through some changes you noticed in this year's internship compared to last?
So I've been working at the same company for the last 3 summers. It's an automated pharmacy, so the robot goes through sorts medicines. So my first summer I was in person, and then second summer hits. It's 2020. The pandemic hits. They have me remote. They were a little flustered. They had to make a lot of changes in their department. A lot of people got moved, and I much rather work in person because as an intern, it's better for me to see what's going on in person than it is to just hang out on a computer and wait for just wait around for information to get to you. And it's interesting because most people think wow, if you're working from home, you're doing something super important, super great or whatever. But I don't know. For me, I'd rather be in person for that.
I agree. I actually had an internship last summer as well, and whenever I went in, it was tough. I mean, they were doing they transitioned decently well. The one thing that was really, really hard was that you had to wear a mask indoors 24/7, no matter what. Just the precautionaries of, moving space to space and different meetings, and then having some people join in meetings and others not, and having to be completely communicative between everybody in the process is extremely, extremely difficult in terms of coordination. And on top of that, it's extremely wasteful, just extremely wasteful, and also extremely expensive for the company just to make sure everyone's safe. And then also taking the precautionaries of making sure, nobody comes into work sick. That's really big, because then as soon as somebody does that, I know at the time, whenever I was interning, they sent everybody home. That's actually what happened to me on my last week. I actually didn't end up finishing my last week because somebody reported that they were in contact with others in the office and they had to send us all home. Thankfully, I wasn't diagnosed with COVID, but it was just kind of a bummer.
It is really a bummer. And it's a year later now too, and I'm still working from home. They can't get a lot of people into the offices. And I don't know if that's because what we are working on goes into hospitals and we don't want to spread things further that way, but it's definitely interesting.
So at the time the pandemic hit, I was working out of state. I was actually working up in Michigan at the time. And Michigan had a very different take from Pennsylvania with how the whole thing started. Although I guess it was reflected more on a local level than a state government level, considering our two governors, Pennsylvania and Michigan, both did similar shutdown procedures. But locally in Michigan, I was in the center. I was actually in the capital. I was at Lansing, which is in the center of the mitten. And it was weird. I was working as a construction consultant, so I was going out onto job sites, active job sites, to run inspection testing. At the time, interestingly enough, most construction sites had been closed. The construction sites I went to go check out were actually Michigan Department of Transportation sites, or MDOT. And they were the only people that were allowed to continue construction during the pandemic initially. But my understanding is it's a lot easier to socially distance while doing the paving process, and it was also essential work. I know that gets tossed around a lot, and it feels a little weird to apply to construction, but the roads needed paved and fixed. If you had a road that was torn up, maybe a major interstate or something, it needed paved. The pandemic hit, but it's something that needed done. So a lot of people were sitting there and doing that.
It was so much easier to pay because you didn't have the capacity on the roads. It was such a low capacity. You could get a lot done. You wouldn't need as crazy of lane closures. It really sped up the work, I would say, because I was also in something similar to what you were doing last semester. And that's exact. We were essential work, so we were there.
Yeah, it was a really interesting change because it didn't feel like my job had changed. It was my third co-op rotation, so I'd already worked for the company for about 6 months or so. I had been working there, and then I came back this summer, and I knew the pandemic was going on, but I texted my boss and I was like, "Hey, so am I still gonna have a first day of work?" And she was like, "Yep, we're gonna have some different policies. Here's what you need to do." She let me know. I came in, did everything as the boss man said, and then just got it done. But then, interestingly enough, I did switch to a work from home position this summer in Pennsylvania, and I think everything that Lauren said is just spot on with just, you feel like you're doing real work, and like if you're working from home, you should be working on stuff. You should be having a lot of fun with it. Where I'm working now, I'm doing wastewater treatment and wastewater management as a civil engineer, and it's cool, it's interesting, love the people I work with, et cetera, et cetera. But there's just times you can tell that construction didn't halt, but it is severely slowed, and a lot of people aren't trying to do a lot of construction. Usually that's more from the contractor side than the engineer side. But it's a lot of twiddling thumbs, sending emails, not really being hasty with replies. I'll send an email to somebody, and if they don't respond that day, that's fine. But I remember when I was working back up in Michigan, where like if I got an email, I needed to check it like that day, reasonably within a couple hours, depending on what kind of job site I was at and what the email was. And that changes. It's really interesting to see people be sort of mentally crushed. I think Hervina mentioned like Zoom fatigue and stuff, and I think it's not just Zoom fatigue. I think it's just a fatigue from everything feeling very status quo throughout this whole time.
Yeah, I feel like I've been sleeping a lot more just because I've been looking at screens so much that I'm just absolutely exhausted by the end of the day. And, I used to, pre-pandemic, I used to be like, I used to barely sleep. Now it's like I have a hard time waking up early. So I don't know. It definitely just a straight up fatigue of life in terms of what we have to do in a day's time and be extra precautious and, extra worried. But I think it's going to change in time. We're not going to deal with, I guess, as much Zoom fatigue. Hopefully, with people getting more vaccinated, we're going to have more things opening and more social events and stuff like that. I just saw that Lollapalooza is actually going to be happening in Chicago this year, which is very exciting. That's a huge event. I'm hoping that things like that are going to turn us around in terms of mental wellness.
Just real quick, people started coming into my office where I'm working this summer, and just, seeing people just so excited to see others it shouldn't feel like a change of pace, but it does.
And even academically, it just hypes the workflow. I think, you feed off other people's ideas, you see other people, you get to interact with them. You could walk and say face to face, "Hey, I'm having this problem," or "Hey, I solved this. What do you think?" You don't have to wait 15 minutes for somebody to jump on a call. You don't have to worry about connections. It's just everything flows so much better in a uniform society rather than in a broken and over a platform society. But anyways, lastly, I really wanted to touch on the interview process, and it most definitely changed since the start of the pandemic, and I think that should be addressed. This pandemic has caused quite a recession, and that really put a noose around most companies to hire young talent. So, David, do you have any final thoughts on the interview process?
Oh, absolutely. So, as you said, it definitely has changed. Most interviews, I would say, are basically through Zoom or maybe even a phone call. For my last job, I actually had a phone call first and then a Zoom call. But to be honest with you, Sam, I actually think this is beneficial for the person being interviewed. Let me tell you why. So, first off, you have this screen in front of you. You have literally all the options in the world. If you don't show up prepared to this, then you're just at fault. Like, you have the company's website right in front of you. You can look up all that thing. You can have all the answers to all the questions that you want to write right on that screen there. You can totally be not as nervous as you are in person. Me, when I go in person for an interview, I'm pretty nervous. I might forget, an answer or something. I might need to take a minute. But online, I feel like it's a whole different story. Not even for me. I feel like it might help someone. Let's say you get your second interview. Usually, that's maybe, like a few days in advance. If you're doing just a Zoom call, it'd be a lot easier for them instead of having to go out of their way to drive to a remote location and do this interview. But obviously, I think there also is the downside of Zoom. Obviously, technical difficulties. If your Wi-Fi is bad or something like that, it might get cut off. There's pros and cons to it. I think it honestly helps the interviewee. Now, I wanted to ask you, Sam, do you think this is where the future of interviews are going to be? Is it basically going to be all online, or what do you think?
You know what? In terms of company and interviewee, I would definitely say it should be something that sticks around just because it's so much easier for both parties, like you were saying, to meet rather than to drive out of your way for it. You can still dress up, you can still be prepared, they can still be prepared, they can do their homework on you, and it's just so much easier. It saves so much time and so much effort and money. I wanted to actually bring this up. In my interview process, I found it a lot easier to have questions ready for them. You know, when you're in the interview process and you got questions coming at you, you might be able to maybe muster one question whenever they're like, yeah, do you have any questions for us? And with having, a screen in front of you, you can put up two tabs, one with them and one with questions, and you might get to know your future colleagues a lot more rather than just going into an interview and being extremely nervous.
Exactly. And with any job, just remember, they need you just as much as you need them.
Yeah, I totally agree. Thanks for bringing that up. Wrapping up our segment on work and life effects, I would like to take a short commercial break, and when we come back, my guest stars will have advice for the listeners on in-person and Zoom classes. Like what you hear? Do us a favor at Woke Talk Podcast by giving us a follow, review, and sharing our content on social media. Woke Talk Podcast is conveniently on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. You can stream our animated audio content through our YouTube channel, or you can listen to our episodes that will feature each Thursday on Anchor, Spotify, Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Podcasts, or Google Podcasts. If you, the listener, have any content suggestions or want to be a guest star on the show, reach out to Woke Talk Podcast via email at woketalkpodcast@gmail.com. Welcome back to Woke Talk Podcast. For the listeners out there, I would love to go around the room and hear everyone's advice on how to thrive in both the in-person and online classes, because some people may not have experienced in-person classes yet or are going to start college soon and don't know what to think.
So I do have advice on education and then also the getting a job process. So for school, I would say stay engaged in your classes, get to know your professors. If they see your face all the time, they see that you're talking to them all the time, they may just cut you a break when you need it. And then for the job process as a student, I say get experience early on. Even if you feel unqualified for the job, I say you should still apply. They don't expect you to know everything right away. It definitely is a learning experience, and they expect you to ask a lot of questions.
Yep, I definitely agree with that.
My tip is kind of like a Zoom tip. It's based off distractions and temptation. So obviously with Zoom being online and classes probably are going to be hybrid in the future, I feel like. So you kind of got to get used to Zoom. So social media has obviously taken over this generation. So it's not going to be easy, but you can't let them distractions come get you. You can't scroll Facebook, Instagram, when your professor's talking. You pay for college, you're paying for your education. So actually get good use out of it. Ask questions, like Lauren said, stay engaged, stay focused on everything, pay attention, take notes, treat it as if you were in person. If there was that teacher just sitting over your shoulder, making sure you're doing your work and not on your phone or such.
I agree. What I would do in just to get away from the distractions of my phone, because that is the biggest thing that distracted me. What I did is I put it on Do Not Disturb, and then I put it on the other side of my room. That way I couldn't see the light, I couldn't hear the ding. It just was out of my mind, at least for the most part. And it definitely helps. After the class, go up and pick it up. But, when you're in class, you definitely want to be paying attention because it's already hard enough to pay attention. Don't distract yourself any more than you already are.
Exactly. And some professors, their voice might be boring. I understand. It might be hard to, actually pay attention. But another thing you could do, you could research about the topic more. Let's say your topic was, fluid mechanics or something like that. Look up more, learn more about it. Use your time wisely in class rather than just sitting there.
I think definitely adding on to that, I found myself and a large majority of my friends, if the lecture's boring or if you don't like the professor or their voice puts you to sleep, they usually have really good PowerPoint slides. And you can sit there and you can look at each slide and you can kind of get what you can from the slide and what the professor's initially talking about. But then I didn't do this personally, but a lot of my friends they would read the textbook. they'd know based on the slide that he's on, we're on chapter 2 of our textbook and we're in this given section. So I'm going to read that section to try and keep up and like stay aware and attuned to like what's going on. And I definitely think a little bit of accountability. If you leave your camera on, especially at the beginning of the year, everybody kind of does it like day one, especially if the professor asks. I know this past semester, all my classes were supposed to be cameras on style classes, and a lot of people fell off the wagon after about 2 weeks. We'll say half fell off after about 2 weeks, and then the stragglers were basically all gone by the 6th week. But if you can be that one person that the professor can see, it may make you look like a sort of teacher's pet, but at the end of the day, it's probably keeping you aware, less on your phone. That professor is going to know that you're there and you're trying and you're caring, especially if they're the kind of professor that asks rhetorical questions and things like that.
They may be more amped to help you out too if you look like you're more involved. So definitely keeping your camera on will definitely help you. The one thing I also kind of wanted to throw into the ring was that, if you are struggling in class when it's a little boring, what I did is I actually went on YouTube and I also kind of did some fun learning interactive videos because you get it from a different source. So say your professor's really boring, but you take key points out of that you really wanted to research and go search on YouTube or wherever, Squarespace, whatever it may be, and just learn about that subject. And you might get an eye opening. You might really love that. And that might really help you out. That's what's really great about, being in a Zoom environment is that you have all of these, opportunities to learn right in front of you. So definitely capitalize on that.
Can I also comment on that as well?
Yeah.
Like some professors just like provide information so slow, especially with like the online classes. I know like it has helped me to go back and watch the lectures on like 2 times the speed that it's already like been presented as.
That definitely helps. Being in a recorded world really helps because then, say if you even miss the class, you can go back. You don't have to worry about bumming notes on anybody or just worrying about missing like really important content. You have it right in front of you, which is so beneficial.
Even look out your window or go outside or go on a walk. I know the perk of having Zoom University for me was if I had like a 6-hour gap between classes, I didn't feel tied down to the building I was in. Like I didn't have that like walking investment. Like I didn't throw on my backpack and walk to the building and I didn't have all my stuff. So I'd go on bike rides. I'd text a couple friends, see if they were also free. We'd go on a walk, we'd go on a bike ride, maybe we'd snag lunch, maybe we'd snag a drink, stuff like that. It's helpful. It'll get you away from the screen for a little bit, and it can really be good from like a health benefit perspective, both physically and mentally, where like it'll give your eyes a slight break and it'll stop any like mental fatigue you might be feeling by just doing something a little bit more simple.
Oh, hi, Cody, the editor here. Definitely mental health is one of the more important things because the whole reason you're in a university is to work your mental muscles and to better yourself and make yourself more knowledgeable on what you want to know. So keeping track of your mental health, especially when you're just at home, not doing anything, it's very detrimental. You really should be going out and trying to keep yourself healthy because that was one of the bigger things and what caused me to end up dropping out of college is because of Zoom University and whatnot. I ended up just kind of sitting at home doing nothing because I was so worried about the pandemic. And I ended up getting in a really bad way. And it caused me to ultimately make the decision to just drop out because I lost all motivation to do anything. So yeah, mental health is definitely one of the more important things to keep in mind while you're going through all of this.
And just getting outside, gives you a bit of a break from reality. And you can meet other people that are in the absolute same boat as you. And you could have a vibe with them. You can create friends and create your own social group that goes on a walk together. Social groups don't just happen, within the walls of campus. They happen outside the walls.
Yeah, and if getting outside's not your thing, just find something that makes you happy that you can set aside, like in between a class or something, to give you that break. Like do something that makes you happy.
Oh yeah, like having a really good hobby will definitely help out.
I agree.
Would it be too much to add on like what Cody was saying?
No, please. This will be the final thought.
Like what Cody was saying, I definitely made myself miserable taking the max amount of credits every single semester. And that's kind of what drove me to transfer and start new. So don't make yourself miserable. Like, take it easy, do what you can.
You know, if you have 12 credits, take that extra class that piques your interest, maybe outside of your major, or, you know, maybe something that satisfies a different requirement. And that way, something really keeps you motivated outside of your major. So maybe if you don't go outside, you at least have something that really piques your interest and really gets you focused in other ways outside of just staring at a screen. All right, and that is a wrap. Thank you all for your experiences in regards to pre-COVID and current status education, extracurriculars, work, and life. Your advice will definitely help the listeners at home that have kids going into secondary education, planning to attend themselves, or are already attending. Tune in next week for our special on autonomous vehicles, and thank you all for listening to Woke Talk Podcast. I am your host, Sam Stanford, and as always, stay woke. Woke Talk Podcast would like to give a shout out to Anchor by Spotify for sponsoring our podcast, along with Ben Sound Music for providing our show with intro, outro, and advertisement background rhythm.